DriveWorks offers a module called DriveWorks Express for free, and every SolidWorks platform is an add-in. And that kind of gets you the beginnings of, okay, here's how I capture a part, capture a dimension, drive that dimension, have a little baby form inside of the task manager. Start that way. And then they also offer a free 30-day trial of DriveWorks Solo. You can get in the door learning that, getting your feet wet with Express, and then we have a 30-day trial here of Solo. Can we get that? I really want to see, take a month and just immerse myself in this and see how far we can get.
Well, thanks for joining on today's SWYFT chat. Today we've got Dave Dewey from Base 10 Consultants, and this is going to be an amazing conversation. We're going to dive deep into several different topics, including kind of just how you got started and what you're doing at Base 10. So let's just start there, if you don't mind.
Sure. I'm Dave Dewey, founder of Base 10 Consultants, and we provide DriveWorks services for manufacturing.
Awesome. And let's start with how you got into that. So how did you get started with Base 10?
Sure. So I've been in engineering for quite a while and was working in a job doing what I help companies with, automating, and just was seeing a lot of the same thing over and over again. Pack and go, copy tree, stretch the model, scab parts from this other custom product that was similar and put it in and ship it out, grab the next one, on and on. And that wasn't real fulfilling and it was boring. And, there's got to be a better way to tackle this. And we tried some design tables and formulas, and that was interesting, and kind of learned a lot about parametric design and how external references can get you in trouble and all that fun stuff. And stumbled into DriveWorks and was like, this is it from there.
So you were in industry, kind of running into scenarios where people were doing similar to but different things and just kind of over and over repetitive tasks. And you took a step back and said, okay, there's got to be a better way. And I think that mindset just probably says a lot about, the way that you think in the future and the way that you approach your clients and things like that as well. And sometimes people just kind of get into the day-to-day and just kind of execute like, okay, I'm getting paid. I've got an hourly job. So let's do some hours here.
Right.
But you think differently.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, it's, the whole story about the granddaughter who is baking the pot roast, and you always cut the ends off and put it in the pan and cook it for so long. And, well, why do we cut the ends off? Well, I don't know. Let's ask grandma. Grandma says, I don't know. Let's ask great grandma. Great grandma says, oh, well, we didn't have a pot big enough to put the roast in, so we cut the ends off. And it's spending a little bit of time thinking about how you're doing things as opposed to just, clocking in, doing the work, clocking out. I think it's important to get into that mindset of continuous improvement and looking for all the little nooks and crannies to gain efficiencies. And like I always tell my clients, the traditional pack and go copy tree world that custom engineering lives in, engineering is kind of disincentivized to improve the product because, okay, if I'm going to add a different flange to this to make this easier to bend or add some different features, and that takes me 10 minutes and it's only going to save the guy in the press brake 5 minutes. Well, why would I do that? Well, now with DriveWorks, you can really just narrow in and talk to the press brake operator, talk to the laser guy about efficiencies and weigh all those things out and spend an hour and a half on that conversation, build it in, and, you're paid back in 10 jobs. It's a much different mentality where you're really able to just grind out all these little pieces of efficiency in the design that you're just not necessarily afforded to when you're just an engineering group, 5-10 guys just churning out drawings for the shop. It's a much different concept.
Now, a lot of times when you're having those conversations, I'm assuming that people are doing it this way, like you said, because my grandmother did it, because I was taught that way, because I've been doing it this way for years. Why do you think that they haven't made that transition or made that change yet before you have that conversation?
Yeah, I think, when you start out young in engineering, ideally, right, you're listening to the older guys about how they do things. And going from, I learned on a drafting table, that the design ideas and how you approach problems and how rapidly you evolve your processes is much different when you're approaching it from that background. And, a lot of the places I've been at, I've been really, really blessed to have like really strong mentors, good engineers to talk to and, listen to, still make my own mistakes, but go back to them and say, you were right. That's not going to work. That's not going to go together well. The welders are going to flip out because it's super hard to get in there. And I think it's just one of those things that, it takes a long time to become a master at your craft. You're just trying to be efficient at doing your craft, and you kind of crest that peak and you're ready for the next thing, but there's still a lot more capability there, right? To be even better and more efficient at your job. Because I don't know any engineers who just want to keep doing the same thing. I mean, we got into this because we like challenges, we like hard puzzles to solve, and we want to help. And just doing that same thing day after day, it just, doesn't scratch the itch. But if you get to that routine, then, you don't know any different, So.
Yeah, I'm curious to continue on this and just dive a little bit deeper on from the engineer's perspective of just turning things out day after day, and they're kind of doing what their mentor taught them. They're kind of doing what they're told. How do we, as business owners, managers, leadership, instill the want and the drive to do things better and do things differently and to improve? Like, are we measuring the wrong things? What's going on there?
Well, we back up a little bit to like, how do companies get started with DriveWorks? Because there's like kind of two ends to that. The one end is kind of where I started from, is I'm an engineer and I was bored and I wanted a challenge. The other piece of it comes to leadership saying, okay, there's some potential here, and like making that an initiative within the company to say, okay, we're going to take DriveWorks and use it as a tool, and not just using it as a tool for engineering, but even more broadly to, going up the workflow to inside sales, outside sales, potentially customer facing, to do like configure, price, quote stuff, or down the line to production, shipping, that sort of thing. But I think it really just kind of takes the most successful companies I've seen who've really latched onto the DriveWorks piece is like when leadership has seen the value there. And especially if leadership kind of has that manufacturing or engineering background, knowing a little bit of the day-to-day, obviously they've been removed from that for a while and should be, but knowing, down in the weeds day to day, what an engineer is going through is important to understand how DriveWorks can help the business. So, just being consistent.
And having leadership buy-in.
For sure. I don't know if that answered your question.
No, yeah, definitely. And that's like the two pieces, right? Genuine curiosity. You kind of got started because you were bored, but you were curious. And you're like, hey, you had that kind of spark. There must be a better way. So you started to take action to learn ideas of how to make it a better way. But who knows if that really would have taken off if leadership didn't see that and say, okay, yep, we're in. Because otherwise they've been like, well, wait, you're spending all this time researching this other method of doing your job. Why don't you just do your job? And then you would have stopped, right? So it kind of takes a little bit of both.
Yeah, and on both ends of that, again, like to your point with leadership, okay, if they know that's the initiative, then that's just step one, right? I mean, you have to have individual contributors who are going to step up, and identifying those people who are curious, who are passionate, who are wanting to learn new things, and are really curious, because you get into engineering and you're like this, and then you start to open up and see more of the business. And for those people who are really excited about, oh, well, how does this handoff from sales to engineering happen? Or, well, what goes into a bill of materials and labor? Well, couldn't that be calculated or analyzed or some kind of logic applied to it? Identifying those individuals to be able to be that DriveWorks lead person is really, really crucial. And again, to your point, like if you have somebody who's curious and wants to do the software and learn the software, and they get squelched by leadership, that's obviously going to be a dead end, because it's not an insignificant amount of investment in the software upfront or ongoing.
So what do you say to those? Because there's probably a number that are watching right now that are that genuine curiosity type. I mean, they're watching videos like this for a reason because they want to learn. They're probably engineers, probably designers, probably people that want to know more about how do I get DriveWorks or, SolidWorks or other tools integrated more effectively at my company because they're doing blah, 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 blah. And I want to help them, improve. And they have that spark, they have that interest, they are reaching out and understanding how do they approach leadership, like how do they have that conversation to help get that buy-in to implement a new tool.
Yeah, so I mean, kind of going back to the basics, DriveWorks offers a module called DriveWorks Express for free in every SolidWorks platform as an add-in, and that kind of gets you the beginnings of, okay, here's how I capture a part, capture a dimension, drive that dimension, have a little baby form inside of the task manager, and start that way. And then they also offer a free 30-day trial of DriveWorks Solo, which is kind of that mid-tier section. So you can get in the door, learning that, getting your feet wet with Express, and then, telling management, say, hey, we have a 30-day trial here of Solo. Can we get that? I really want to see, take a month and just immerse myself in this and see how far we can get just with this. And if the person is really passionate and they're picking it up, it's a no-brainer. I mean, we're talking anywhere from like 1 to 5 days to 15 minutes per customs. It's significant. Like the engineering payback is ridiculous. And there's no tool out there that drives SolidWorks as efficiently as DriveWorks does. And they're constantly improving, constantly working to stay up with the latest versions of the software and new features as new things come in. They're right on the tail end. How can we automate this? And super responsive to customers who say, hey, I'm doing this weird thing with how we do part numbering. Can we do that? Case in point, I reached out to them. The CEO and co-founder, Glenn Smith, emails me back a few hours later. He's like, well, yeah, we don't have that right now, but it's going to be out in the next release. And I'm thinking, oh, well, that's really ironic. I ask about it. Come to find out, they added 3 new gen tasks just because I had asked about them. And like within a few hours, tested out a proof of concept. Yeah, we're able to do this. Now we're going to test it and make sure it's robust and launch off that way.
Yeah, it's awesome. Especially the willingness and the interest to stay on the latest and greatest version of SolidWorks and keep up in that realm. Mm-hmm. I mean, a lot of times you hear the opposite. It's like, oh, I'm not on the latest version of SolidWorks because I'm using X, Y, or Z, and I can't update because of
step with PDM and
whatever it needs to happen.
Sure.
So.
Awesome. So I am curious, I'm a little bit more removed from the DriveWorks. I know you've had a lot of experience with it, but I am curious kind of when you have a customer reach out to you and say, hey, I'm interested in implementing DriveWorks, what are some of those like pain points or those problems that they're really trying to solve? I know you've talked about efficiency and things, but what are the things that they're seeing in their organization that they're like, this is a big enough problem that I'm going to reach out to Dave for him to help me solve it?
Sure. So usually for people who are starting out, who are just interested in DriveWorks, the reseller will get set up with some initial training and they'll work them through that. So usually 99 times out of 100, when people are coming to me, they've already have the software. And well, why are they coming to me? There's a number of different things. First, it might be, well, we got this software, we're just not really sure where we're going with it. Or we started off going like gangbusters, we were doing great and automating, and then all of a sudden things just kind of tailed off and well, we don't know why. And then, well, we want to do this next big thing. We want to push a bill of material into an ERP, or we want to query a CRM so that, the customer name on the drawing or whatever is consistent or things like that. So those are 3 of the big things where people are coming in just trying to either get going or get over that next hump and get it kickstarted again. So,
okay. Do you see any like KPIs or like metrics people are using to measure implementations or like use of the software that they're like, hey, I'm trying to, reduce our time for, this drawing to be released to the floor, or, what are those things that they're measuring that they're saying, hey, I'm trying to do this?
Honestly, most of my clients don't do KPIs. Okay. I mean, it's sure, for sure. I mean, I think it's super important for everybody to know how productive somebody is being, I mean, I think that was exposed very clearly during the whole COVID pandemic and all the remote work is, there were some people out there who had a really good grasp of, Dave's on there, he's doing his job. And then there's other people in there who might be thinking, oh, Dave, well, he's not here. No work's getting done. Where do you solve that? There might be a guy in the corner watching YouTube for 6 hours out of the day and he's productive, So, I think a lot of it, and it's really hard too with that industry, with custom engineering, because okay, well, how long does it take? Everybody has their different skill sets and different strengths and speeds that they work and accuracy. And at the end of the day, I mean, it's really, really important that the accuracy and quality that's going to the shop is really high, because if you're catching mistakes on paper, it's one thing. If metal's cut, it's a completely different situation, and all that rework and lost trust with the shop and engineering and, or heaven forbid it goes out the door and you've got to pull that back. So I think it's just trying to make sure that you have some kind of measure of engineering to know, okay, well, what is our accuracy to the shop? What is the productivity? If it's taking them 8 hours, or if it's taking this person 1 hour, can we pair those guys up to kind of share their secret sauce and co-engineer together just to see, oh, well, why are you doing it that way? That takes a really long time to do, or, different things like that.
Love that idea of collaboration and bringing people together and breaking down those silos, even if they're on the same team. Just like you said, taking maybe a senior and a junior and allowing that coaching to happen. And I know that we've had the opportunity at SWYFT to partner with companies that maybe don't have that senior. Maybe they're a smaller organization and there's a lot of juniors in their organization. So we have a coaching call every single week that you can jump on and ask those questions if you don't have the opportunity to engage with a senior. Now, you mentioned custom engineering and kind of an industry. What industries specifically do you see more applications for DriveWorks or automation just in general in the design process?
Sure. A lot of it, I mean, conveying is huge, right? Because you have conveyors of different widths, different heights, different lengths, curves, different colors, options, that sort of thing. So that's a pretty common one. The HVAC industry, where you have different vents of different sizes, cabinets, trucking, customization, custom utility vehicles, like line trucks and things like that. Those are some of the big ones that I've seen. I mean, there's some companies out there too. I'm sure they won't care, but like Clippard Instruments down in Ohio, they make little micro valves and things like that. They have SolidWorks. They have DriveWorks. They don't use DriveWorks with SolidWorks. It's literally just a front end to their SysPro ERP, because their products are that complicated. There's something like 20 million permutations of SKUs that they don't want to clog up their ERP with. So they create these on demand just with through a DriveWorks interface. So, I mean, there's just a lot of strange applications sometimes that come up too. I just did one 2 years ago. A company, again, same thing. They use SolidWorks, but they don't use it with DriveWorks. And they build machine tooling, and we built a speeds and feeds calculator for them that they put externally on their website so that machinists can go in and choose their materials, choose their tooling, choose that stuff, and get all the proper speeds and feeds that they need to run the material. Again, nothing to do with SolidWorks really, but because DriveWorks, I think you could really look at it as a kind of a low code platform, because a lot of the rules, like if you get Excel, you can get started in DriveWorks pretty easily, because that 20 years ago, that's where it started. You were in Excel. And so a lot of those functions in Excel just kind of carry over. And it's obviously split quite a bit, and it can do so much more now. But the basics of just doing like design automation if you know Excel, you can do it, and it's great. I mean, yeah, again, that alone is the big ROI that companies can see. So
yeah, perfect. And I know that there's probably some industries that take off faster or slower than others, maybe just based on their environment or leadership, right? Maybe play a massive factor, but also there's this transition from kind of mass manufacturing to more semi-custom type solutions. So everyone's trying to relate things back to part numbers, or, we're doing small volume runs or things like that, which is a great, just, not necessarily tied to an industry, but hey, how do we do semi-custom type solutions?
And how do you come up with part numbers? That's a whole 4 hour.
Well, once you come up with that part number scheme, though, you can just drive your models right from your part number, right?
Exactly. Yeah. DriveWorks your way out of schema changes.
There you go.
Awesome. So I feel like you've given us a little bit of a peek into what an implementation can look like. But I'd like to dive into that a little bit more. So, someone could get a free trial. They could just get started with the software and just start trying it themselves. But if you were to be involved in an implementation, what would those steps look like for really getting a manufacturer up to speed quickly and going to actually see those results quickly?
Sure. I mean, really, my biggest thing is if you know that DriveWorks is what you want, then just dive in. Don't try to go cheap with Solo. It's a little bit less money up front, but there's so much more capability, and there's a lot of design decisions within the project. Project is like something in DriveWorks. You have a group. There's a bunch of projects within it. There's just so much more that you can do within the project itself, and then a lot of more programming concepts where you have modularity and reuse of a project, where maybe you're calculating the moment of inertia and stress with a project, and each different project above that has product in it that maybe has different profiles that's feeding into this and getting feedback on. So you're not having to recreate that logic over and over again. You can't do that in Solo. So being able to kind of approach it modularly, there's more capability. There's more stuff even on the design automation side that you can do. But getting into Pro right away, get that admin license, get that first product identified, break it down to, we always talk about the conversation. Well, what does the conversation between sales and the customer look like? And you start to kind of break that down. And I realize we're just talking about engineering here, but this is the long-term path. Typically is, at the very least, we're going to put all this logic and rules and forms and validation in. It helps engineering, but ultimately we want that for inside sales, so that the engineers the first time are getting valid data. So starting with that whole concept of what does that conversation look like between sales and the customer, building out that form. And I'm a big advocate of actually getting that all the way down, saying, okay, here's how we're going to manage all of that product, and build all that form out, and then start with your model and really try to keep the scope of that model small. So even though the form has 30 different things on it, we may only automate 3, right? Maybe we'll just start with the basics of length, width, height kind of thing, and build that out. And then immediately go to the next, to try to keep getting that ROI. And, one of the things that I've noticed is that first project that you do, when you come back to it a year later, even myself, 10 years on, if I'm going into a company and we're doing something turnkey, we'll do that first project with them. And then a year from now, I'll look back at that and think, wow, I should have approached this completely different because I better understand the product now. Or somebody else who's just getting into the software might now know the software better. And it's just such a mess when you look back at it, And so there's a big learning curve that goes into building all those projects up. So once you kind of get that established and you get those best practices built, and then you can go broad and say, okay, we have 10 products. Here's our here's our base template for how we're going to do a product within DriveWorks. Let's do all the products, And then once that gets further built out, typically that next step is to get DriveWorks Autopilot, which is basically a workstation with a SolidWorks license to it. And as the models get released to the queue, that's just generating models. So you don't have people in there manually clicking a button, twiddling their thumbs, waiting for a model to generate and all that stuff. So it immediately takes all of that time off. And you can set up email notifications to say, okay, this is done generating, and tell the engineer, hey, your model's ready, go get it. So that's typically kind of that second step. So that's like a dedicated server. And then that next, like I mentioned earlier about taking that next step up the workflow to sales, going into that whole CPQ world. Okay, well, now you're going to have a lot more users inputting this data, right? So you add DriveWorks Live, which is basically that form in the browser. So you can go in, you'll get a 10-pack of licenses, and all of your salespeople or engineering can still go in and configure a product and release them, and they're just getting automated background. It's pretty cool. So.
Awesome. So one of the things I wanted to chat with you on is kind of the future of what's coming next. So it sounds like there's already tons of cool like automation and things that you can do specifically between SolidWorks and DriveWorks. But as we look at kind of just in general, what's going on in our world, there's AI, there's all these just crazy software tools coming out. And I'm curious if you have any insight into some of the things that we may see from DriveWorks or what you might expect if, you're looking out the next few years.
Yeah, I know there's a big push because everything's pretty much native clients at this point. But there is they recently announced that the next year, the version of DriveWorks Pro Server, which is kind of the communication hub for all the different modules, and that's all going cloud-based. And so it's very clear to me that like long-term, that's where it's going to go, right? So people will be able to access Administrator in the cloud and build their forms and all that stuff. Obviously you're still kind of tied with SolidWorks being, I don't even know what the term is for when it's the 3D experience platform, like connected version. So it's like the native SolidWorks solution that's on your computer, right? So I'm not quite sure how that'll work, but honestly, beyond that initial capture and definition of the master model, you don't necessarily need to be in SolidWorks to be doing a lot of this work. I mean, all the logic's on the application, the DriveWorks application side, and all the UI and all that interaction, all the external communication that happens between the ERP and CRM, that's all separate. So, that's one of the big initiatives they're moving towards. Honestly, there's not a ton. I mean, they're putting a lot of effort into the Drive 3D, which is it's their. So there's let me back up a little bit. From the technology standpoint, you can generate a model in SolidWorks and output it as a Drive 3D file and show it within a DriveWorks project, right? Or there's an alternative method where you have a Drive 3D document, which is all kind of like native DriveWorksy stuff. And there's primitives, and they've added new features to that where you can actually do extrudes and cuts, very simple like 2D stuff. But it's all very fast, very dynamic. You can animate it, make it look really good, apply textures like PBR textures and things like that to make it look very, very realistic. And, that's been a big initiative with them. But it's a whole other, it's not like you can just apply the rules for SolidWorks to that and bring it over. It's a whole other like area of like being an expert kind of thing.
Yeah, makes sense. And thanks for breaking that down, especially related to DriveWorks. Expanding upon that maybe just a little bit and thinking about your background, engineering, manufacturing, kind of all the different companies that you're involved with, and then tying back in Anna's question about the future, like what are you seeing that they're most excited about? What are they most concerned about in the industry as a whole, with all the rapid changes in software like DriveWorks, like SolidWorks? And are the things they're excited about? Are the things they're concerned about? What are you seeing from your side?
Sure. This is a really common one too. And especially when like leadership comes in and they say, okay, well, this is what we want to do, right? And that 5-person engineering team, maybe the first reaction is, oh, they don't want us to have jobs anymore, right? And so approaching it, obviously, we're trying to get rid of mundane stuff and automate things, and that's taking work away. But a good example was one client I had 2 years ago. They were in the utility body truck market, and the packet that they were giving the shop was basically a formed drawing for the sheet metal and a flat pattern, and just a stack of that, practically a ream of paper per job kind of thing. And obviously they provided the nesting for the stuff. So we automated a big chunk of that, but now instead of that, they're getting an electronic version. They're getting that all tied into their system. They're getting a lot more detail where they have exploded views. They have instructions on how to put things together. They've taken the opportunity to move to slot and tab to help welding with fixturing and setup. They're exploring offline programming for their press brake, so they're not having to do all these manual setups. And with that, now they can start to look at production optimizations of, here, let's group these common materials together, better material handling opportunities because we can supplement the ERP with pick lists that are specific to how they do things. So engineering has upped the game of documentation. It's still the same size group, and they're doing more different stuff, but they're also more engaged. They're helping the business, and all that mundane, boring stuff, oftentimes that had mistakes with it, is now just being automated and being consistently done on the back end. So
you mentioned the team size didn't change, but
right.
Yet their focus is more on things that only they can do.
Exactly.
And they can pull from their experience, and you can't automate that. So how are you able in your job and your position to put yourself in a scenario where you're involved in discovery, involved in conversations, where you're pulling on your personal experience and your personal knowledge, and not just, clicking the buttons, because the buttons can be automated?
Can you rephrase the question?
Yeah, it wasn't really a question. It was more just a statement about I completely agree with that. Sometimes engineers, if you get a group together and there's concerns about automation because they see their current tasks today are, 1, 2, and 3. These are what I'm doing today. It's helping them understand, yes, but tomorrow you could be doing 4, 5, and 6 and enjoying your day-to-day more and providing more value to the organization. And maybe 1 and 2 have gone away, but that's fine because those are just button clicks that, we can automate, and that's fine. But we're going to find ways that you can, provide additional value, creating a better product, engineering tab and slot, doing some different things that we weren't able to get to before. Sure. So it's just reframing that from an engineer's perspective.
Yeah. And I think too, sometimes in situations I come into, because I get a shop tour and I talk to everybody just to understand the whole system of what they've got going on. And from time to time, I'll run into situations and talking to shop supervisor, engineering doesn't know anything. We brought this up 17 different times and they haven't done anything about it. And you hear the other side of the story and it's just like, okay, well, you can kind of see why that happened. And one of the really cool side benefits that I've seen is because of what I had mentioned earlier, where you're able to sit down and talk to the press brake operator and say, well, how are you bending this part? How could we make this a little bit easier for you on setup, or, not have to carry out this big 70-pound gooseneck die to stick in your press brake and approach it differently. Now all of a sudden you're opening those lines of communication up. The shop feels heard. Engineering now has time to address those problems, and all of a sudden those barriers between engineering and the shop start to break down. And then you start getting this feedback loop in where now, okay, now this person doesn't have a problem coming up and talking to this person in engineering is saying, well, what if we tried this? Well, what if we tried this? And now all of a sudden you're into that mindset of, that 1% a day, just getting better and better. And over time, you see that hockey stick of efficiency go up. And I've seen it. I've seen it on like profit margin reports for DriveWorks implementations, where this product starts out at, a low margin, and you see the improvements up.
And you relate a lot of that back to increased collaboration between teams.
Yeah. Because the very nature of it itself, the best way to do it. Yeah, you can just sit in engineering and just sit in that bubble and keep that mentality of chucking it over the wall. Or you can talk about, well, what is it that you need? Because now we're able to provide more resources to help both ends. It's a different approach. And again, it's the difference between design engineering being this like production drawing machine that just, prints out drawings and becomes like a true like engineering support system for production and sales, but even more broadly to the whole business. Even into accounting, which sounds strange, but once you start to see this workflow from RFQ to shipment, the whole business is in that chain. And if you're supporting that with a very basic DriveWorks workflow, and there are limitations with the ERP or CRM, you can now like do enhancements to maybe make handoffs a little simpler or minimize double entry for data. There's just tremendous opportunity there. So.
No, and I really appreciate your time and diving into this. As we were asking questions about the future, and then you started talking about collaboration, it really, connected a lot of dots for me in this conversation about how the successful businesses in the future need to figure out how to break down those barriers sooner, because their competition they're learning how to collaborate better. They're learning how to learn from each other better. And that's what's going to help them keep up with the changes in technology. It's not just bringing in, or watching a webinar. It's not just, researching the latest and greatest. It's actually having the team day to day, having that continuous improvement mindset and communicating.
For sure.
So really appreciate it, Dave. Anna, I don't know if you have any last minute questions here, but your time has been valuable, and I'm sure a lot are going to take away a ton of value from what you had to describe today. So thank you so much for coming in the podcast studio and being involved in the SWYFT chat.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.